Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this month's Educate to Elevate session presented by Twin Cities Orthopedics and Training House. We're super excited tonight for our talk about the intersection of mental health and sports performance. And we're extremely grateful to have Dr. Matthew Mikesell joining us from Premier Sports Psychology. Dr. Mikesell is a licensed sports psychologist and leadership consultant for Premier Sports Psychology, and has focus in the areas of high school and collegiate athletes, working through mindset optimization and injury recovery, in addition to working with clinical anxiety and depression. Dr. Mikesell holds a master's degree in sport and performance psychology from the University of Denver, and a master's degree in counseling and a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of North Texas. When not working, you can usually find him outside with his family, being, outdoors on hikes, being on the water, gardening, or this time of year showing his toddler how awesome sledding is. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Mikesell. Oh, you're on mute.
Perfect. Thanks for that. So just to confirm that, we're all unmuted, but also that we're looking at the same screen. We're looking at the title screen, right? The intersection of mental health and performance, right?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. Okay. I have the dual screen happening over here. So if you see me looking over every so often, just wanted to make sure that we can see both sides of this. I am super excited to be here with y'all. I was just talking with folks earlier about when this opportunity came up, I think back in May or earlier in the summer, to be here. This was something that I really jumped on. I am super passionate about working with athletes of all ages, but I spend a lot of my time with high school and college age athletes, really working to understand what's going on for them internally. What is that inner conversation that's running through, your mind when you're on the court, on the field, on the ice, in the pool, or even outside of sports as well. So we'll give a little bit of a glimpse of that today. And like I said, just the opportunity to be able to share with so many of you was something I couldn't pass up. So as David said, my name is Dr. Matt Mikesell. I work for a company called Premier Sports Psychology here in the Twin Cities area. I'll say more about Premier in just a little bit as I kind of share a little bit about kind of what sports psych is and how it can be used. And as we go through today, I really want us to, one, as active as we can be via Zoom. I encourage that, whether that's questions on the chat. I'll ask you to reflect on a couple different things as we go through a number of different kind of questions and things I want you to be thinking about of, hey, how does this apply to me? Or where is the biggest area that I can improve? So if you have something to write with, if you have something to, a pen, paper, a second screen up, a phone up, something like that, I encourage you to just be thinking about that today. That'll kind of foreshadow some of the work that I end up doing in session. Sometimes when we think of therapy or think of psychology, we get that picture of like laying back on the couch and sharing all your deepest and darkest secrets. And more often than not, it's not that. Doesn't mean that we don't sometimes go that mental health direction. But when we're talking performance enhancement, we're getting up, we're getting active, we're bringing golf clubs into sessions and really looking at like, how is our swing and what is, what's being impacted when we're thinking certain things. We're looking at clips of your highlights and kind of pausing and dissecting and analyzing. We're using biofeedback to really train our brain to recover in a different way than we might not otherwise. All that to say is we get pretty active in session, so we'll get a little bit of a taste of that today. But first, let me see if I go. Okay. When we talk about sports psychology, I'll get into the definition of it, of what it is and what it isn't and things like that. But let's just get a lay of the land. Right now, in this, oh, perfect. I'm just seeing the note about sending chat to the message. Great. In terms of understanding sports psych and where we are at today, earlier in 2023, at this point, more athletes or public figures more than ever before are opening up about their experiences with either mental health or sports psychology or the way that they train their conversation that's running in their mind. We all have that conversation that's running in that's going through our mind at all times. We don't always know how to train that. So here I have just eight athletes, eight examples of in more recent years across different sports and some even internationally, of athletes that are really at the highest level saying, hey, this is a really important part of our training. When we're talking about mindset training, we're really talking about like the fourth leg of a chair, right? We have that physical training. That's where TCO comes in. That's where Training House comes in. We have the technical training and the tactical training, right? That's where your sport coaches come in. That's where the strategy comes in. But that fourth leg of the chair is that mental training. Sometimes that is optimizing our performance, and sometimes that's coming out of a rut. Now, for those who are watching closely at home, you might think, wait a minute, what's The Rock doing? He's not a professional tennis player or an Olympian or a basketball player or a soccer player over in Europe. The Rock is a really cool story about when he was a college football player and really struggled with injury and when he got injured and he had to give up that part of his professional identity or this personal identity that he really struggled with that. So if that's not something, I think maybe some of these other stories we've heard of a little bit more, whether that's Simone Biles at the Olympics, Serena Williams, Paul Pierce talking about being depressed back in 2011 after he went through this kind of harder stuff in his personal life. Paul Pogba, this might not be as familiar of a name, really talking about the identity that he held and how that was associated with, certain numbers and positions on the field. More than ever before, we have the field really like a lot of energy around sports psychology. And when we talk about how we actually go about this or kind of what this then looks like, we also realize that it's not just the highest level athletes that are training their brain. We also know that for those who haven't seen the show, this is Coach Ted Lasso of the fictional AFC Richmond. If we're talking about like sports psychology in the news and the media, we have a sports psychologist. Spoiler alert for season 2, if those of you haven't seen it. A sports psychologist now, like on Apple TV and in a really popular show that's won all sorts of awards, right? So the field is growing. There's a lot of energy there. But these are the questions that I get. That's Matt or Doc or kind of coach, whatever role I'm in at that time. I hear what you're saying, but I don't know how. I don't know how to train my brain, or I don't know what I should be doing. Coaches, parents, we might find ourselves saying things like, an athlete has to be more focused. Well, how do we train focus? We might find ourselves saying an athlete has to be more confident. Okay, but how do we train that? We might be talking to someone, maybe a teammate, who's having a hard time adjusting to a new coach. And you say, okay, well, just kind of hopefully not suck it up and deal with it. But sometimes that's a message of like, okay, how can we just like play the game and deal with this afterwards? A lot of these things that we kind of know that we should be doing in the sense of focus more, I should be confident, things like that. But that how is a really a missing piece. And so rather than just coming out and tell you the exact how, we're going to build to that in a second. And specifically, we're going to build, look at a model that we use at Premier that really focuses on those factors that influence both mental health and performance. But first, I want to share an example of 2 athletes that I've worked with relatively recently, within the last year, that kind of highlights a little bit of the scope of sports psychology. Changing the sports a little bit just to kind of keep things confidential. I should say that as a sports psychologist, the core of my training, I am a licensed psychologist, which means that things like confidentiality, I'm legally and ethically bound to. So when I share these examples, I de-identified them a little bit, but happy to provide more information for those who are curious and to what extent I'm able to. So first athlete, this was a high level high school athlete in her junior year of her fall sport. Her spring sport was her main sport, the sport she really wanted to, um, and was really preparing to go to college and high level offers there. But in her fall sport, which she just played for fun and always enjoyed, all of a sudden it's junior year, and the team's pretty good. Actually, in fact, much better than her spring sport, her main sport. Her fall sport team was pretty good. And as the season went along, this team started doing better and better and better. And all of a sudden, the media is catching on. And now it comes playoff time, and there's a lot of expectation. So initially, was loving the sport, was just doing this for fun. But then all of a sudden, she started noticing that, wow, I'm kind of distracted by, or my focus is pulled away from performance. And now I'm thinking about everything that everyone is saying. And I really, I like to use this idea of we've heard of like YOLO, right? Like you only live once, and that idea of FOMO. But that idea of FOPO, right? If FOMO is fear of missing out, FOPO is fear of people's opinions. This was an experience she never really had in this sport because she did well and it was just for fun. And all of a sudden, this FOPO starts showing up. And as the season works towards the playoffs, she started performing pretty poorly, to be honest. But not nearly what she was capable of, and certainly not consistent. So that's when she came to Premier, and that's when we started working together. Credit to her, she didn't wait until like the day before to show up. We had a few good sessions, a few good weeks of work to really put her in this mindset to be able to stay present, to be able to stay kind of hungry and not worry as much about what other people are saying. Easier said than done. So I remember meeting with her the day before the first round of playoffs. And this was a sport where it was single elimination. It wasn't a best of 3 or 5 or 7 series, survive and dance type of idea. Met with her the day before, and she was ready. She was excited. She was like sharing back with me her mental preparation. We spent a lot of time talking about how are we going to handle setbacks because it's going to happen, and all these sorts of things. 10 minutes in to that the next day's playoff game, she gets hit, lands weird, busts her knee, and she's out for the next 9 months with an ACL injury. All this work that we had done together to prepare her to perform at her highest level, and all of a sudden the work wasn't meaningless or pointless, but now all of a sudden we're dealing with something that has nothing to do with performance. Credit to her again, she kept coming in because now what we were working through was the injury. Now what we were working through was, how do I stay motivated to go to PT? Because this isn't my sport, right? This isn't fun. This isn't what I signed up for. Is this even worth it? And she went through all of those stages of denial, of anger, those stages of grief that we see oftentimes with these long-term injuries. And it was really difficult work. And it really wasn't about optimizing on the field. It was more about her mental health at that time. We'll come back to her in a second. The other athlete that I want to share a little bit about, in a sense, couldn't be more opposite. Opposite in terms of a winter sport athlete, senior year, so I guess there's some similarity there. But again, I'm going to be honest, this athlete was not the best athlete. Quality person, really good guy, right? Like a really hard worker, really disciplined, all those things that you'd want to see. But in terms of athletic ability, didn't have it. And he knew it, right? I'm not saying anything negative behind his back. He knew it. And didn't have a lot of playing time, but kind of thought that, you know what, this is my senior year. I want to figure out how I can make this as best as possible, right? For whatever however long my sport journey lasts, which is probably just going to be this season, I want to make it the best possible. Whatever my capacity is for performance, I want to make sure that I am performing to that capacity every single time, even if I'm not starting every game or getting as many minutes as I'd like. I share these two examples because one, we have a high level athlete wanting to go Division 1, wanting to kind of be at the peak of her game and knew it. And on the other hand, we have an athlete who's just trying to maximize their experience. Both of these athletes are, collectively really represent a lot of the work that we do at Premier, or kind of the types of athletes that we might see. And I want to share a little bit about some of the work I did with them and how that might map onto your experience. So when we talk about sports psychology, I've mentioned in sharing those stories how, for that first example, that athlete who ended up hurting her knee, we were initially kind of over here, right? This is a continuum that kind of represents everything from, on this right side, sport optimization, and I think on this left side here, sport restoration. So sometimes when I'm working with a college team or even a pro team or an Olympic team, I'll bring this visual up and say, we know that we don't always need to have something wrong in order to get better. And I'll often compare to strength and conditioning coaches. I don't know if we have any strength and conditioning coaches or athletic coaches in the audience right now. But if you go back like 40, 50 years, there was this thought that if you went into the weight room, if you saw a strength coach, if you started doing pull-ups and push-ups and deadlifts and squats, that meant that you were weak. You had a problem. Because if you were a good enough athlete, you wouldn't need that. Fast forward like 50 years and you look at like a Power 5 conference, and that top strength coach is one of the top earners at the university, right? It is such a recognized importance. And so I take that example and that analogy and kind of map that onto here. If we think of physical injury versus physical like strength and building strength, that building strength part is over here. Hey, nothing's wrong, but I want to go to a training house. I want to get better. I want to get faster. I want to increase my endurance. This is that growth mindset idea that I can always get better. And so some of those tools there, and we'll break some of these down as we go through today. Some of the tools that we utilize are some like the classic sports X skills, right? Training our focus, training our confidence. How do we be clutch? Using imagery. How do we train for pressure, right? That's kind of hard to do, but how do we do it? On the other hand, if we continue with that training house type example, some of y'all are probably at TCO or training house, not because everything was great, you just want to get stronger, but because you had an injury, right? Because there was something that happened, and you're in a cast, you're in a brace, and we have to get back. There's that restoration piece. We got to get back to where we were. Sometimes this is as my example shows here. Sometimes this is like mental health, and we're kind of trying to get back to baseline. But this doesn't always just have to mean that we're having a mental health concern over here. This could simply mean that, hey, I'm not confident. I lost my confidence. That senior that I mentioned in that second story, let's say all of a sudden he has a new coach, and now he's lost his confidence. Maybe that confidence was coming from this affirmation he had from his coach. Well, he still wants to get the best from his sport. So how is he going to be able to do that? So if on one hand, we're talking about performance optimization, on another hand, we're talking about performance restoration, in the middle, I think of what it's like to be a high school, a college, a middle school athlete, professional athlete, an Olympian in 2023. It's not easy. This is like, this can sometimes just be like working through some of the daily life stressors sometimes. When we talk about sports psychology, we're talking about the ability to, and people who have training and experience in providing all sorts of care, ranging from mental health to that sport optimization. And that starts to get us into as my slide earlier was the how and the what, right? When we talk about Premier, and we'll talk about our kind of model of doing things. First of all, at Premier, like I said, we're located right in the Twin Cities area, probably only about 10 minutes from the that Egan location of the Viking Lakes facility with training house there. We do individual sessions, team sessions, leadership training, executive coaching. We'll do a lot of mental health support, and what I mean by that is I'm not, maybe the person struggling with mental health, but maybe I'm a leader or I'm a coach, and I want to know how can I help when something does come up? What are some ways or what are some things that I can say? So we'll kind of help those who are in those supportive roles. We do a lot of workshops or keynote speeches. We also have a lot of assessment, so ADHD testing, for example, and then just general assessment. Maybe that's leadership assessment, kind of getting back to that leadership training and executive coaching. But the assessment piece is something that we're gonna anchor a lot of our work in at Premier, because we know that it's one thing to say just focus, as maybe a coach or a parent or a teammate might say, hey, you just got to focus. It's a whole nother thing to have research-backed practices that tell us how to do that. And so kind of with all of this on the left here, we end up doing a lot of work with athletes, parents, coaches, maybe the front offices of professional organizations and businesses. And these are the different spaces that we're in at the bottom here. So if we're talking about, giving me my answer here, if we're talking about mental health, right? Like I said, that is an element of what we do. This isn't so much sitting on the couch and just sharing our deepest, darkest secrets, but we know that if I'm working with an athlete who is 0 for 4 at the plate, maybe they just have a little bit of a confidence issue, but when they leave the baseball field or the softball field, there's no concern there. But sometimes what's going on off the field does impact us. That idea of compartmentalizing, harder to do than to say. So your first question they'll have you think about, you don't have to, if you want to, write in the chat, feel free to, you don't necessarily have to, but what percentage of people struggle with mental health? Kind of let you think about that for a second. This is something that coming out of COVID, we know that numbers have only increased. And I think you're seeing a lot of reports on that in and out of athletics, right? Mental health has been something that is getting a lot of attention the last few years. So what percentage of people struggle with mental health? I see one number showing up as 85%. Any thanks for throwing that in the chat. Any other numbers that we want to throw out there? Chat or even saying something. Okay. Depending on the numbers that the study that you see about 1 out of every 4 or 5 has some sort of mental health diagnosis. And I frame it that way very intentionally. So 20 to 25%. This isn't an exercise in looking around and diagnosing your teammates, but if you look around your teammates, that's, if I look at basketball, right? We're kind of starting that winter, or kind of in the midst of that winter sports season. That's at least one person on the court of every team. Again, that's not saying that we're going to go and diagnose someone right now based on, well, you seem to be struggling the most, you must have a mental health concern. Not saying that, but just it can help kind of give us a visual for that. That being said, 5 out of 5 of us have mental health. So I like the response there. 30% who admit it, the rest aren't being all the way truthful. And maybe that speaks to this a little bit, right? That 30%, right? The 25% that have a diagnosis that say, hey, based on the DSM, based on the criteria, yes, you meet it. But we all have mental health. So one of the takeaways that I want you to have leaving today is this over here. This is what we call the mental health continuum. If we think of, if I go back to my stat, 1 out of every 4 or 5 have a mental health diagnosis, that tends to be kind of like you either have it or you don't, black or white. But instead, I want us to think about it more in this sense, that we all have, as as we have kind of one of our responses in the chat saying, we all have, we're always somewhere on here, right? Think of this, maybe we think of it as a battery, right? We're either full battery or we're running low. And the factors that all that impact that, just some examples are on the left there. All of these factors go into our mental health, our physical health, our relationships, our social well-being, our emotions, our feeling. Maybe we do have a mental health disorder. Our self-image, our identity, our family history, our brain chemistry, our coping skills, our substance use, our community, our culture, our environment. And I'm going to add to that too is our sport performance. So like I said, one of the big takeaways is that we are somewhere on the mental health continuum, and this is fluid. I might wake up feeling great, and by the end of the day, I'm exhausted, or vice versa. Maybe I kind of have a slower start to the day, but I'm able to, have some positive experiences throughout the day, and I'm ending the day in an okay place. So this gets us to the intersection of mental health and performance. That first story that I shared of the athlete who came in initially for kind of that sport optimization and now is injured and going through mental health. I'm happy to report she's in a much better place now, right? We got through the injury. That was about a year ago, and huge credit to her. Huge credit to her coming out of that. She now has D1 offers, even though she missed her entire spring season, because she was willing to put in the work. So kind of coming full circle there. We often get asked that question at Premier of what are the factors that impact both mental health and performance. Research didn't have a great answer for this, unfortunately. So we dug, this is a few years back. We at Premier dug into the research. I'm going to say this wasn't me. I'm boots on the ground. I'm not a big research analytics, plug things into SPSS and watch the numbers go. If this was the matrix, I wouldn't be the person with all the green numbers floating by. That sometimes is not always me, but we have an awesome R&D team at Premier. So they said, okay, well, let's just not know this answer. This is pretty critical. So we started, and maybe some here were even involved in this process a few years back. We started looking at the thousands of athletes that we've worked with, and we had conversations, and in those conversations we looked at themes, and from those themes we then kind of beta tested a few different versions. And this is what the data shows. And this is what we came up with, the mindset assessment. If you've been with Premier for a little bit, or been with TCO for a little bit, you might have seen the AWPA, the Athlete Wellness and Performance Assessment. This we renamed it, but it's the same idea here. These are the 5 factors that influence both your mental health and your sport performance. Again, going back, we have all the research in the world, even outside of Premier. We have all the research in the world that correlates mental well-being and performance. We have all the research in the world that shows that. And these are the very specific overlapping variables: growth mindset, our mental skills, our team support, our self-reflection, and our health habits. In the rest of our time, kind of the second half of our time here, I'm going to go through each of these very briefly and give you a little bit of a quiz. Not that anything you have to report out, but just kind of an internal check. Where am I at? Where am I at in these areas? And the goal then is at the end of this to say, okay, if I can only work on one of these areas right now, what's that area going to be? So if you have that pen and paper out, as we go through each one of these, I want you to give yourself a letter grade, A, B, C, D, F. I've often found, just kind of on the side here, when I have an athlete go, okay, rank yourself 1 through 5. Well, a 2 out of 5, yeah, that's indicative of I probably should work on that. Well, all of a sudden, when I've given myself an F kind of like that actually holds some weight. I know what that means, and there's like a little bit of more of an impetus to then do something about that. So I'm always a big fan of the letter grades instead of just the numbers. Let's dive into this. When we talk about growth mindset, what we're specifically talking about there is an athlete's ability to be kind and understanding towards oneself when faced with difficulties and to embrace challenges. We'll spend a little bit more time on each one of these. Mental skills is basically, are you training your brain? Are you using sports psychology skills and tools to train focus, to train imagery, to train, wow, when my mind starts thinking about the outcome because maybe we're starting the fourth quarter and we're about to blow out that team or kind of, maybe upset that team that normally we don't. And I start getting ahead of myself a little bit. How do I bring it back? Or that pressure moment of I'm on the free throw line and down by 10 seconds left. How do I train my mind to be locked in there? We know team support's a really big factor, especially if I know that my team has my back, I'm more willing to put myself on the line and kind of express myself on the field to actually try to influence the game and make a difference rather than be worried about that fear of failure, which I hear a lot of athletes about. Health habits goes beyond just are you physically active. I'm going to assume that if you're working with a sports psychologist, if you're at TCO or training house, you're probably physically active. So this goes more into like the recovery aspects and I'll call it like the prehab as much as the rehab. Other than that, self-reflection. We used to label this mental well-being, but it kind of got there's a lot of confusion on like, are we talking about whether or not you have mental health diagnosis? It's less about I meet criteria for a diagnosis and more about are you willing to reflect on your internal processes and use your resources? How open are we talking about things? One of the many kind of mantras that we'll often say is name it to tame it, right? If there's something going on internally, we have to be able to talk about that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to work through that. We also do have a youth version. This is for 10 through 17. A lot of the similar ideas here. Just, some subtle differences. The mental skills are the sports psychology skills. The life skills is a little bit of that different element there. There's still the wellness. There's still the team culture. That's kind of the kind of related to that growth mindset, but kind of goes a little bit beyond that. We're going to spend more time on the adult version, which is 18 plus, but we do have the two different versions. Why that's different is when we go through the process of, like I said, of surveying and interviewing thousands of athletes, what a 12-year-old responds as is important for mental health and well-being versus a 32-year-old is going to be really different. So we norm, we have a whole subset of 10 to 17-year-olds that we've asked and kind of kept their responses separate than the adults. And then real quick, how important is each of these clusters for mental health versus performance? The answer is that they're both really important, right? And this comes from the data. They're both really important. Okay, so let's dig into this. Growth mindset, one of those 5 clusters. This is that idea of how are we defining success, right? The idea of growth mindset really came from Carol Dweck and her research. I think she's at Stanford or was at the time on what makes certain children successful, specifically academically is where the research started, and what makes certain children able to do things like persist through difficult tasks or to stay motivated when they don't get it at first. And what she framed in this book named Mindset, and we're on the shelf here. If people are curious about it, I can show it to you after. What she really decided is that, or what research showed is that athletes who are able to define success as I'm better than you, that I beat out someone for that starting spot, or I have a better grade, right? If my success or if my definition of success means being better than this comparison piece, we tend to be more in that fixed mindset, right? Or we often have that idea that like talent, it's not about my growth, it's about what I have. And oftentimes we kind of feel like we're stuck with what we have. Versus those athletes that are able to say, hey, even if maybe the playing time isn't quite there yet, I know that I'm getting better and I have goals beyond this season, right? It's okay if I don't peak right now. I chuckle at how many 15-year-old athletes that come in saying like, this is the end of it. In conversation, say, well, you want to play in college, right? We're not trying to peak at 15. We're trying to peak at like 21, 22. So it's hard, but let's take like that 5, 6, 7 year growth in mind and talk about how are we getting better each day. And all of a sudden, the day to day, I lost against this local team starts maybe not mattering, but we can put it into a perspective of, hey, did I get better today? So my question for you, the questions will be on the right side there in red. You don't have to respond or in the chat or anything. This is just your own self-assessment. How do you typically react to a mistake? And how does your reaction hurt you or help you? If you feel like you respond super well when the mistake happens, yeah, I'm able to just jump in and kind of take that next play. That idea of like failing forward, you might have an A. But if you say, you know what, Doc, when I experience a mistake, maybe I feel like an imposter, that I really shouldn't be there. That maybe I'm worried about getting found out, or maybe I tend to catastrophize it a little bit and say, wow, that did not go well. Like, what am I even doing here? Like, I don't belong here. This team is would be better without me, my playing here. All sorts of different unhelpful things that our mind goes to. If you're more on that side, then maybe we have an F or a letter grade. Take some time. A, B, C, D, or F. You can do like the B plus or the B minus, totally fair. The next one is that performance mindset. And like I said earlier, this is that idea of how do you train your mind? When athletes come in, and when we talk about the mindset being like that fourth leg of a chair, right? That physical training, that technical, that tactical that I mentioned earlier. Oftentimes athletes don't necessarily come in thinking that it's unimportant. They just don't know how. Sometimes we kind of like do some things and it kind of works, and sometimes we don't really have that same like systematic approach. We're talking about that performance mindset. It's how do you train for pressure? How do you train to be in the moment? Do you prepare mentally for when adversity hits? I think it was Mike Tyson that quote about everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So true. I think another example of this is everyone likes to set goals at the beginning of the season before we're in the dog days of 2 days. Before we're in a winter sport, right? It's dark when I go to the gym in the morning. It's dark before I get home at night. And so day in, day out, it's just a grind. We didn't get beat by our rival team for the first time in 10 years, right? It's easy to set goals when we haven't hit adversity. What do our goals look like after we hit adversity? How are we able to stay locked in? Easier said than done. A, B, C, D, F. What do we got? Next one is team support. We know, like I said earlier, that when you're on a team that you feel supported by, and this isn't like kumbaya, right? This is to say, this could be challenging. This could be, I think of this as, on one hand, they are gonna like demand more and more from me and like pull me along. They're gonna encourage me. They're gonna really say, hey, you got to do better than that. But on the other hand, they're gonna support the entire way. Now, maybe sometimes that sounds ideal, and yet we know that's a really big deal. When we're able to have that task cohesion at the very least, that's a really important factor. So something I'd invite you to think about is this question on the red, like what are those characteristics of the team environments that have helped you thrive? But the second question in particular, how did you contribute to that environment? I think too often we get stuck like right here at the end. Hey, well, those are other people. I can't control others. So I'm either in a good environment or I'm not. How well have we controlled our controllables to shift that environment to something that's helpful for us? That's a hard thing, especially when we start talking about coaches, and there's a power difference there. And I don't want to be the person that's just like complaining to coach or telling the coach what to do. And a lot of what we'll talk about in kind of regards to this is how do we have direct conversation? How do we um, how do we share what we're needing in a way that's going to be heard? That's hard to do. That's really hard to do. And health habits, like I mentioned, this is that like rehab, prehab. We know we train hard, but do we recover hard? My hope is that by being with PCO, by being with Training House, we all do that better than most. But I don't know. So if we think about like yourself in past seasons, and this could be true for parents, this could be true for coaches, this could be true for athletes. Um, you probably know at some point you may feel kind of burnt out. So what are we doing to actively prehab that, to prevent that? Or this is probably such a huge thing that we talk about too. And I remember a conversation going around with me just a few weeks ago, and the question was asked like, if you could have your athletes that you work with do one thing different, what would it be? And you would think it would be like all these different, like they would be mindful, they would be able to not take things personally when a coach is critiquing them. They would no, the number one thing was they would get 8 hours of sleep. We know that that makes such a big difference. And I don't think anyone argues that. But when it comes time to actually putting that into action, how well do you do that? And then finally, when we make our way all the way around that circle, that mindset assessment graph earlier, when we talk about self-reflection, how willing are you to share what you're struggling with? And that could be on the field, off the field. Do you know those signs of those early signs of when you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling stressed? The question here, I have it as a red flag. Another way to think about this is going back to that mental health continuum of the different colors, or like a stoplight, right? I know I'm on green, and I know what red feels like, but do you know what your yellow is? And do you, when you're at yellow, do something about that so we don't get to red? Kind of bring us back. I end up talking about stoplights, truthfully, more than I ever thought I would have, for that analogy, but others as well. Because it's building that awareness piece is so huge. But then what are we going to do about it? Again, A, B, C, D, F. So now we have those five letter grades. I want you to go back and I want you to circle the letter grade that's lowest. And next to that circle, or if there's two that are tied, that's fine. I want you to write down something. And I'm going to go back to here. Kind of have a quick little refresher of what these are all on. I want you to write down something that you are committed to doing by the end of this weekend to improve that area. Right? That might be for a growth mindset. An example of that might be, I am going to intentionally push myself in practice, acknowledging I might fail, but I'm gonna really push myself to improve the speed of my ball handling or my puck handling. Again, knowing I might fail, but growth happens at the edge. For team support, that might mean, hey, I recognize that I perform at my best when I know this teammate has my back. So I'm gonna show them that I have their back and start building that connection. That might be that action item you're committed. For a mental skill, that commitment might be, you know what, I'm gonna have a specific goal each practice, and I'm gonna lock in on that. These are just examples of that. Health habit might be, I'm just gonna start by tracking my sleep. Maybe that's through some sort of wearable device. Maybe that's just a little bit of a journal or something that you're just writing something down. And for self-reflection, maybe that's, hey, I'm going to write down what it looks like when I'm at green, what it looks like when I'm at red, and what my signs of yellow are, so I know what I need to do. Here's just an example. Again, what is your lowest letter grade? And write down next to that what your commitment is to doing before the end of this week. And I'll give you a quick minute for that. Why is this important? One, what the mindset assessment does is it gives us a framework and a language that it doesn't matter your like the sport, your experience with sports psych, your goals. It gives us a framework and a language for us to be on the same page from the very beginning. When athletes come in, we give them this assessment and we say, okay, we're going to take this again in a few months, and this is how we track progress. That's one of the questions that I often get within sports psych is, like how many sessions does this take? The average is 6. Average person comes in for about 6. My first story that I shared, athlete 1, was much longer than that, right? I saw her through the course of her recovery, not necessarily every week, but just throughout the recovery. Whereas that second athlete was just under 6, kind of first about month and a half of the season, and felt like he was good to go. The other thing is like, why is this important? Is that we've been studying this for years, and we have the data now that shows that again, these are the things that make it different. So we use this assessment to take a really personalized approach to the work that we do. On top of that, even outside of like, if you never came to Premier, we'll get there in a second. What we know is that when your mindset assessment scores are higher, that means you're engaging in more self-care. That means your burnout rates decrease. That means your motivation rates increase. That means your psychological distress decreases. That means your performance increases. So I had your take-home point earlier of mental health as the continuum. These are 3 other take-home points that I really want you to drive home. If you want to write these down, if you want to take a picture or a screen grab, I encourage you to do so. 1, your mind is a muscle, right? So just like we train, I personally, we did a lot of deadlifts this morning. I am feeling that for sure. Just like I trained deadlifts, and it leads to some like, okay, I'm kind of sore. We should be training our brain just that same way. Or just like if I'm naturally a righty, I want to train my left-handed dribbling, right? Training my weakness. The stressor is not very good. I need to train that. And it happens more than just once a week. This is something I'll share with every athlete that I meet. We can do great work meeting once a week, once every few weeks, once a month, whatever it is. But to get the best from this, to optimize this, I put on the athletes. Say, hey, what are we going to do in between? And I'll help kind of give some homework for that. But like, it's about getting in the reps. So just as if I deadlifted once a month, I would get stronger. But if I did deadlifted once a week, I would get much stronger. That same idea. The second take-home point is that support matters. Just like you wouldn't wait to break your arm. Wait to go to the doctor if you break your arm. If you're struggling, let's not struggle alone. We have the support. Let's not struggle alone. And with that, just like that first athlete that I shared, you need just like that second athlete too, is you don't have to be a rock bottom to start. Again, I think sometimes within psychology, we think that that's for those who are struggling. But we know that sports psych can help those who are struggling just as much as it can help those who just want to perform at their best when the pressure's on, when it matters most, most consistently. And what that best is going to be different athletes. So I mentioned before, when we were talking on this screen here, how even without coming to Premier, there's a lot of takeaways. you can take the mindset assessment. I have a QR code on, I think it's just the next slide coming up here. You can actually take the mindset assessment. This is a little peek behind the curtains of what you're getting with that. I'm just, just made up a name here, so don't read too much into any of that. What you can get is when you take the mindset assessment, you get an automated report back. So you don't have to be a Premier client. You can just go online, take it, like 25 bucks, and you get your score compared with all of your kind of your peers and your pro athletes. Say, okay, if I am a college student, how am I doing relative to my peers? Okay, I'm in the 80th percentile. I'm probably pretty good. But if let's say if I'm a college senior and I want to go pro, well, geez, now my benchmarks are in a really different spot. And again, I just made these numbers up, just made this report up. So just to kind of give you an idea of what that's looking like. But the other side that you get is you get your, if you kind of look at over here, you get your mindset score, you get like action items of what to do about it. You get a case study to show like what it looks like in action. And so with this report, you get a lot of information on how do I take this assessment and then do something with it. So it's not just I don't know, it's is it your Enneagram? I'm a 9. So now, okay, well, what does that actually mean? What if I want to be an 8? What do I do? This actually tells you what you can be doing to take those next steps. These are the QR codes that I mentioned. This is also on our website. The left is for the mindset assessment for adults. That's the one that we mainly went over today. The right is for the mindset assessment for youth, so 10 to 17. Scanning that doesn't like take you to something that you automatically are going to be paying for. It just gives you more information. So I'll leave that up for a second. I encourage you to just give that a quick scan on your phone, and then just keep the browser up for later. Again, more as more information than anything else. And I'm happy to go back to that slide. Okay, so we're at the end here. That time went super fast. What we did today is we took a little bit of a lay of the land of where is sports psych at, and we know that it's booming even on Apple TV. And I hope something that you really took away from this too is that sports psych is not just for the elite athletes, right? On that slide we showed, we're in the MLB and the NFL and the MLS and the NHL. Like, it's not just for that level. It's for anyone on this call. And then I hope you were able to, through the mindset assessment, start seeing like, okay, this is what that might look like. I was really debating initially, like, on this presentation, do I just, I don't know, teach the skill of imagery or teach something like that? And I wanted to give you more today. I wanted to go beyond something that you could read in a book, and say, okay, well, what is research? What does best practices show? And how do we actually take action steps for that? And so that's one of the last things I hope that you got from this too, is looking back at your letter grade. I hope you have, leaving today, you know those 5 factors that impact your mental health and your performance. And you have an action item that you can commit to doing before the end of the week. If you'd like, feel free to shoot me an email with that and say, hey, this is what I'm committed to doing. Or afterwards, hey, this is what I committed to doing, and this is the outcome. Just for that little extra layer of accountability. Of course, you don't have to, but feel free to do so. We are on social media. We have an Instagram page that gets posted on pretty regularly. What's not on here as I'm doing a quick scan, but we are on LinkedIn and Facebook. Our Facebook tends to be more geared towards parents. So if you're a parent on the call, that might be a specific avenue you might want to check out. But LinkedIn, we post different articles and newsletters and stuff like that. This QR code will take us to the athlete specific page of our website, but we also have other a parent landing page and a coach landing page. Okay, I'm going to pause. I would love to hear the question. What are we wondering about at the end of today, related to anything we spoke about, or just kind of sports psych in general?
So yeah, feel free to drop those in either the chat function, drop them in the Q&A function if you got them. While we're waiting, I've got one for you.
Yeah,
So at TCO Training House, we have people that sort of specialize working with different sports, different body parts, things like that. Is that kind of similar in your field where somebody might like specialize in working with hockey players or specialize working with individual sport athletes? Is that something
yeah,
people should be thinking about?
a really, really, really good question. Um, Sometimes that ends up happening just based on the experience that people have, either their own experience. Was a two-sport athlete in college and soccer and track. So I can speak to those experiences a little bit more than I might be able to, as a gymnast say. That being said, that's not necessarily something that we intentionally filter. And one, because there's way more sports than I could ever um, play in my life, and I want to be able to be experts in that. So, one thing I'll often say is when someone comes in, a couple examples of just clients that I've seen the last couple of weeks. High level fencer, I don't know fencing prior to this client. High level, like we're talking highest level of curlers, competitive drone flying, and American Ninja Warrior, all in the last 3 or 4 weeks. My response to them is, I'm not going to pretend to be the expert American Ninja Warrior. I want you to teach me that. And I'm going to teach you how to be the expert in mindset. I'm going to own what I know and I'm going to own what I don't know. And that ends up being a really cool coming together point. Oftentimes, when athletes can share about the sport that they love, that can be, I get excited to do this thing. I get excited to talk about sports. Like, it's something I really love. So, all that to say, to answer your question, um, you if you really want someone to play that sport, that information is in our bio. But you don't feel like you have to be stuck there.
Awesome. We had one question come in. What does the option of workshop slash keynote speaker look like?
Oh, really good question. Um, that can look like a lot of different things. That can look like, if you are a coach and you want like a 3 session workshop or kind of a weekend workshop for your team, great. We've also done a broader conversation around like mental health in the workplace and have that in like a keynote speaker at a conference, or if you're in a business, that might be um, at your offsite, bringing us in to kind of talk about how do we optimize performance. I didn't say this earlier, and I should have. When we're talking about mental skills training or psychological skills training, really what we're talking about is resiliency training. All those factors, that growth mindset idea, that reflection, that how are we getting better, that deliberate, that intentionality training, that's resiliency training, and that's applicable in all sorts of different domains. So if you're curious, Ryan, about a workshop or keynote specifically, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'd love to kind of talk about what that would look like. And I should say that can be virtual or in person.
I know at the beginning you kind of had mentioned some of these high profile people that have been in the media addressing mental health, but
Yeah.
how on like a local level can people help kind of break the stigma more around mental health and maybe be more supportive to teammates?
Yeah. Love that question. Um, because at the end of the day, yes, national level, international level athletes talking about mental health can kind of start shifting things, but that doesn't always like make an immediate impact on our team. If let's say you're a teammate and you know someone is struggling, one of the biggest things you can do is ask, how are you doing? Right? Let's really normalize this. Let's really make this a part of everyday conversation. I think the iGen, right, the post millennial generation is doing a better job at this. And there's a report that came out December 2021, really looking at the impact of mental of COVID on mental health. And one of the things that came out is again that youth are struggling, and youth are also talking about this a lot more. And that would be one thing I would really encourage is really normalize this in conversation. Athletic trainers, same thing. if you know that you're, or as you know, as a coach, if you see someone struggling, don't be afraid to ask the question. I think sometimes people are afraid to ask questions because it's uncomfortable. That's understandable. But so is like that friend or that teammate or that athlete of yours suffering in silence. Um, I think another reason is that people might be worried about asking about mental health is they don't want to like assume something or like plant an idea or something like that. But what we know from research is that doesn't happen. You know, more often than not, and I'll kind of wrap up my long-winded response with this, is we know that the number one time and time and time and time and time again, the number one variable to help out in a stressful situation is perceived social support. If I know that someone's in my corner, that's the number one thing that matters. So show that you're in the corner.
Another question come in. How can a parent best help a child through a difficult time or a slump?
Yeah, yeah. How old is this child? Or are we just thinking in general? Thanks for that question. Okay. I really there's a lot that happens at 16, slumps or not. A couple thoughts that come to mind. One is meeting the athlete where they're at. Hey, what's going to be like? Sometimes as a parent, we wanna come in and we want to fix something, right? Because we don't want to see our kids go through something like that. They're in a slump. Something's going on. We want to fix them. So it's solution, 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 solution. Hey, have you tried this? Have you talked to your coach? Get more BP. We'll go to the gym. We'll all that. Instead, maybe enter that conversation of, hey, what are you needing from me right now? If you want, like, if you need solutions, we are going there. But like 16-year-old, if you just need someone to listen to, I can be that person. And again, that going back to that perceived social support being so important to them, like when you can share that message of, hey, what are you needing right now? Because I recognize it's not always a solution, or it's not always just listen. Maybe you do want action. When you say, hey, I'm where you're at right now, that says, wow, you're in my corner. Um, that's one aspect. Curiosity and question is another one too. Versus, hey, I think you should do this. I think you should do that. Um, just digging deeper, right? We don't always have to have a solution, but just questions and curiosity and engagement can show, hey, I'm here with you. It's also an interesting age where teenagers start going to friends more. So asking, hey, do you talk to anyone else about this? Is this something else that you bring up with your friends? That might be another indication of, okay, they are getting some support, or no, like they don't feel like they can talk about it. I've seen another question there. 16-year-old athlete wanting to compartmentalize a big life disruption. That sounds really difficult. And I provide a lot of really empathize with that, because when you're trying to compete, life happens. I mentioned before that it's really difficult to compartmentalize because um, we don't we're not robots, right? It's not just like a plug in and plug out. Um, but depending on that sport, uh, just a quick idea, and would love to talk more about this. A quick idea is really allowing yourself a transition time. That might be that car ride, that might be after school when I change out of my school clothes and I'm changing into my whatever practice gear or game gear. And there's a principle that we teach a lot. It's a focus principle. And the word is win. It's an acronym for what's important now. There's a lot of things that are going on in and out of sport. But in this moment, what's important right now? That doesn't mean that the life stuff goes away. It means that I'm trying to lock in at this moment. And then when I get home, good practice, bad practice, what's important right now? I hope that's kind of a start a little bit.
So, and then I think there's one more. I think this is a follow-up on the keynote
Mhm.
topic. Are you talking to high school level athletes as a whole, like an entire team together?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Just a quick, that could be a specific, basketball program. That could be, like all levels. That could be with just varsity. That could be with one high school in the Twin Cities area. They have a leadership group that is across all different sports. Yeah, we talk to teams as a whole for sure. That's a big part of what we do.
Awesome. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, so just wanted to take a second to thank you again for being with us, Dr. Mikesell, and of course, thank you to our audience and for all your great questions. We definitely appreciate it. If you saw in our email, this is actually our last live webinar, so we're going to be moving to monthly sessions that are video recorded that'll be emailed out, posted on social media. So keep an eye out for those moving forward, and we'll have some options for you guys to be able to ask questions still with those moving away from live as well. So yeah, keep an eye out for details, and hope you guys all have a good rest of your night and a good rest of your week.